afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Gorham, and I'm the Regional Emergency GBV Advisor working at UNFPA, but working on their mandate to coordinate in emergencies. But for today, I am also the chair of the Regional GBV Working Group for East and Southern Africa. I'm really pleased to see you all online. As many of you know, it is the launch of the 16 days of activism to end violence against women and girls. The 16 days, they start today and they end on December 10th. Throughout our campaign, we will be having various webinars, but I think even more exciting is that we will also be releasing videos each day of really exciting or innovative human rights defenders who are adolescent girls based in countries throughout the region. I think many of you have probably received today's video where we were showcasing a Roma from the Numba Mountains of Sudan. So I've mentioned this on many of my emails, but you will be getting a lot more emails from Kabeli or myself over the next 16 days because we want to share all of this information with you and hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoy sharing it with you. Next slide, please. So the focus of our campaign here at the Regional GBV Working Group for East and Southern Africa, our members have decided to focus specifically on adolescent girls in emergencies. And we're highlighting the specific needs and vulnerabilities of adolescent girls. As many of you know, adolescent girls are exposed to various forms of gender-based violence, such as FGM, early and forced marriage, and sexual violence. These often overwhelming protection concerns coupled with alarming rates of teenage pregnancy. Here in East and Southern Africa, we have twice the global average of teenage pregnancy among adolescent girls. These vulnerabilities of adolescent girls are vastly different than the risks faced by adolescent boys and adults. Too often, the rights and needs of adolescent girls are ignored just because they are young and female. And so I'm hoping throughout our 16 days that we can hear from experts from various organizations, but more importantly, from adolescent girls themselves, how we can reverse these trends and what we can do as a community to make sure that adolescent girls are safe in their homes and in their communities. So I'm really happy to present our two speakers for this afternoon. We have one of our great members here at the Regional GBV Working Group. He is also the co-chair of the intersectionality pillar of our working group. We have George Odwe, who is a research associate at Population Council. And then we also have Anawat Joli-Oketa, who is a youth champion on sexual and reproductive health rights based in Uganda, who's going to talk a little bit about what actually do the statistics that George presents mean in practice as someone who's living that reality. And so we're really happy that Jolie's here to provide those insights and tell us a little bit about the work she's doing as an adolescent girl in Uganda to help counteract some of the things we're going to hear from the HVAC study. Just a reminder, please keep your microphones on mute, your videos off, If you have any questions, please write them in the chat, because we will be answering them in real time in the chat. And then if there is any time at the end, we will be able to also take some live questions for our speakers. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us here at the launch of our 16 Days of Activism campaign on behalf of the Regional GBV Working Group for East and Southern Africa. And now I think I'm going to turn over to my colleague, George, to take us through the HVAC study.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to be presenting this particular work, which is conducted by the Baobab team, the Baobab Research Program Consortium team, which aims to generate evidence to enhance sexual reproductive health of vulnerable population in humanitarian settings in East and Horn of Africa, as well as the Great Lakes region. So at the Baobab Consortium, we generate evidence on the magnitude, consequences, as well as protective factors of sexual reproductive health issues, including the violence against children, unintended pregnancy, as well as unsafe abortion in refugee settings. And today, I'm deeply honored to present some of the findings from the Humanitarian Violence Against Children and Youth Survey in Uganda. And mainly I'll focus on adolescent girls' experiences, which is in line with the GBV AOR working group theme for this year's 16 Days of Activism Against GBV. In terms of the background, I think Jessica has highlighted some of these issues that we are talking about. But the violence, as we know, is a real global issue, as well as human rights issue, and it affects many children. And studies shows that almost 1 in 4 adolescent girls ages 15 to 19 have experienced intimate partner violence at least once in their lifetime. However, we do have gaps when it comes to the scale and magnitude of violence against adolescent girls in humanitarian context, which is very important in terms of generating evidence for policy as well as programs in terms of the prevention and response. So the Humanitarian Violence Against Children Survey objective is mainly to assess the burden of violence against children and youth and its context in refugee settings. And secondly, to identify risk and protective factors, utilization of services, as well as the health consequences. And these go a long way in terms of guiding violence prevention and response programs and policies. And so under Baobab, we were able to conduct the first humanitarian violence against children and youth survey in Uganda. And it's basically an adaptation of the standard violence against children survey, which has been conducted in a number of low, middle income countries, over 20 of them. However, there has never been one that is conducted in the humanitarian context. And so this was the first of its kind. And data collection took place in between March and April 2022. That involves a cross-sectional household survey of children and youth 13 to 24 years in all the 13 refugee settlements in Uganda. And today, I'm particularly going to focus on females aged 13 to 17 years. I'm going to talk about their lifetime experiences. However, since we also covered young women 18 to 24 years, but in terms of the presentation, I'm going to present their experiences before they reach age 15. That is when they were still children or under 18 years of age. So in terms of the experiences of any violence, and here we captured physical violence, sexual violence, as well as emotional violence among girls. We found out that nearly a half of females aged 18 to 24 years, that's 43% in the refugee settlements in Uganda, experience violence during their childhood, that is before they reach age 18. Among those aged 13 to 17 years old girls, almost a third of them had experienced violence in their lifetime. In terms of the prevalences of different types of violence, we see that among those aged 18 to 24 years, about 1 in 5 of them, that's about 19%, had experienced sexual violence before they reach age 18. And now more than a quarter of them, that's about 28%, had experienced physical violence by any perpetrators, and about 14% had experienced emotional violence by a parent or a caregiver. Looking at the experiences among girls aged 13 to 17-year-old, we found out that about 7% of them had experienced sexual violence by any perpetrator in the past 12 months. We also noted that about a quarter of them, that's about 26%, had experienced physical violence in the past 12 months, and about 14% had experienced emotional violence by a parent or a caregiver in the past 12 months. Now, in terms of the different types of sexual violence, we noted that unwanted sexual touching is quite common, and also unwanted attempted sex. We also noted that about a very high prevalence when it comes to pressured sex or physical sex. And we are talking in the range of 8 to 10% of those aged 18 to 24 years had experienced all this before they reach age 18 years. The most common perpetrators of the most recent incidents of sexual violence in the past 12 months among 13 to 17-year-old were mainly current or previous intimate partners, but we also see a high number of perpetrators in the form of classmates or friends, as well as strangers, and to some extent also authority figures. And authority figures here includes teachers, security officers, employees, those who are working in the settings. In terms of the intimate partners, we considered intimate partners to be current spouse or previous spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, or romantic partner. The context of sexual violence in these settings, we noted that the location of the most recent incidents of sexual violence among 13 to 17-year-old girls who experienced sexual violence in the past 12 months was mainly, it mainly occurred in the outside location. And the outside location here includes places like roads, street, markets, schools, and even shops. And also in terms of the context, we noted that most of the first incidents of sexual violence among 13 to 17-year-old girls occurred mainly after arriving in the settlement. So we are talking about nearly everybody here, about 92% of them who experienced sexual violence. The first incidents occurred after arriving in the settlement. We also looked at the disclosure, knowledge of services, and service seeking among 13 to 17-year-old girls who experienced sexual violence in the past 12 months. And as you can see from this particular slide here, about a third of them who experienced sexual violence in the past 12 months knew of a place to seek help for any experience of sexual violence. That's about 30%. However, it's only 6% who told someone about their experiences. And even more worrying is that only 2% sought help for any sexual violence, and less than that received help. We also present on the experiences of sexual or physical violence in the past 12 months among 13 to 17-year-old girls by witnessing violence at home and disability status. And what we find out is that significantly, those who witness violence at home were quite high compared to those who did not witness violence at home. So those who experience violence were higher among those who witness violence at home. You're talking about 54% against 15% who did not witness violence at home. And so witnessing violence at home is really a risk factor here. We also did the analysis by comparing participants who are with disability compared to those without disability in terms of the experience of sexual violence or physical violence in the past 12 months. And notably, we see that there is higher proportion, those who experience physical sexual violence were higher among those with disabilities compared to those without disability. As Jessica already alluded to, that indeed experience of violence exposes many girls to health conditions. And so we looked at the mental health condition among 13 to 17-year-old girls who experienced sexual violence in the past 12 months. And the story is quite telling in terms of there's high mental distress in the past 12 months among those who experience sexual violence compared to those who have not. About 75% compared to 71%. We also see some differences when we compare the experience of violence with those who intended to hurt themselves. And we see that those who experience violence were quite high in terms of intentionally planning to hurt themselves, about 8% compared to 5%. And the same pattern is observed about suicidal thoughts. Now, based on these findings, we see that there's a high prevalence of violence against girls in refugee contexts in Uganda. And the first experience of sexual violence often occurs after arriving in the settlement. We also see that the first incident of sexual violence in childhood largely occurs outdoors as opposed to within homes, while disclosure and service seeking for sexual violence is quite low in these settings. Furthermore, we also note that survivors of violence experience a greater likelihood of experiencing mental health problems, intentionally hurting themselves, and experiencing suicidal thoughts compared to their peers who have not experienced violence. And so this has got quite some implication when it comes to programming. And we see that there's a need to intensify violence prevention efforts that are required during childhood years, given that increased violence exposure among girls as they grow old can be quite harming. There's also a need to promote disclosure of sexual and physical violence, as well as help seeking among survivors. And there is need for an attention to the subgroup that is at greater risk of experiencing violence, that is children with disabilities, as well as those who witness violence at home. So under Baobab, based on these findings, we developed some response mechanisms or response. And what we are currently doing is working with the Ministry of Gender and Labor and Social Development in Uganda, is leading this particular intervention that involves working with parasocial workers to screen. And this particular work is supported by the Office of the Prime Minister, UNHCR, Window International, as well as the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health. So the main goal of this intervention is basically to promote sexual violence disclosure and care seeking and service uptake through primary school-based screening of children in Kiriadongo settlement. So this particular intervention is multi-component, and it's built around screening, and mainly it implement targeted training of the parasocial workers to be able to systematically and sensitively screen children for sexual violence and provide immediate or first-line counseling, as well as accompany them or refer them for acute cases. The intervention also involves having parent dialogue, so just having a dialogue with parents of the students or of learners to sensitize them on the sexual violence and as well as promote child protection. It also involves awareness creation among children to raise awareness about sexual violence and available care. And it also involves service provision whereby on-site parasocial workers based at schools are able to screen and accompany some of the cases that are identified to child protection services by UNHCR implementing partners. So this particular intervention or results are forthcoming, but what we see from the preliminary finding is that it's pointing to the feasibility and effectiveness of this intervention for proactively identifying child survivors as well as linking them to care. So lastly,
because instead of us going through this phase, I'm seeing we shall be going up and down.
Apologies for that, but this is my last slide. Basically, I want to acknowledge the partners, more importantly, the government of Uganda through the Office of the Prime Ministers, the UNHCR and its implementing partners, and other partners who really played a big role in and enable us to conduct this particular survey. Thank you very much. And over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, George, for that comprehensive presentation. We do have some questions from the chat that I will present to you during the Q&A, but I also see that Chichi has been answering some as we go along. Chichi, anything you wanted to add? I see that you are online and that you did answer a couple of the questions in the chat. But before we transition to Jolie, any thoughts or follow-up, Chichi?
Thank you very much, Jessica and everyone. Great questions. I just wanted to send in a quick response to the one about whether we have any qualitative data. And just to say that, we did do a follow-up study, just to understand some of this information more in depth. We did this in just one settlement, though, Kiriandongo settlement in Uganda, to get a much deeper understanding of the kinds of sexual violence that children experience, how these come about, and how children navigate that whole scenario. We'll have a report available in the first quarter of next year. And maybe when we say that, I see the question about IPV amongst children coming up. These are essentially boyfriend-girlfriend relationships and violence occurring within these relationships or intimate partnerships. And I think I will leave the rest to George unless George hands any over to me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chichi. So just to be clear, when we're talking about intimate partner violence, we're recognizing that adolescence might start at 12, but it also progresses up to some agencies even go into the 20s. I think this study was till 19 years. Did I miss it?
This study looked at interviewed those ages 13 to 24, but for those who were no longer in childhood, those ages 18 to 24, they were looking over their childhood and reporting their experiences of violence. For those ages 13 to 17, they were looking at their current childhood experiences.
That's great. Thank you, Chichi. We do have more questions, but I want to make sure we also have enough time for Jolie, who is our human rights advocate here, who works with the adolescent population in Uganda. Jolie, we're really happy to have you on the line. And I'm interested to hear how you respond to hearing a little bit about violence against children in Uganda, particularly adolescent girls. We saw that George had mentioned that approximately 16% of perpetrators are classmates. We also have over 50% are partners. And I was wondering, Jolie, maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself and what work you're doing, and then maybe look at some of these statistics and how you view them in your environment. So Jolie, maybe you could give us a quick background on who you are and the type of work you're doing on behalf of adolescent girls in Uganda. Over to you, Jolie.
Hello.
Hi,
It's
good
me,
to hear
Jolie.
your voice. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Jolie. I am a youth peer educator from Uganda. I'm really passionate about this topic because I've seen how violence affects many girls in my community, and I believe that together we can make a difference. I'm 20 years old. Hello, Jessica.
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the violence experienced by adolescent girls in Uganda. Yes.
Go ahead. Yep, please do.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Yeah. I'm talking about the forms of violence faced by adolescent girls in Uganda. Like in Uganda, apparently, there are many adolescent girls and they face different forms of violence, including the physical abuse, sexual violence, child marriage, emotional abuse. This is especially seen at the camps, the refugee camps, whereby the people most of the girls are on their own. And you see in the physical form of abuses, this happens especially in their homes, in schools, and even in public places, whereby the girls are really abused physically. Then sexually, many girls experience sexual harassment, there is sexual assault, and they are forced into relationships against their will. Then we also see child marriage is another form of violence that the adolescent girls are facing in Uganda today, whereby some girls are married off at a very young age, which denies them their childhood and education. Because if you're already married at your early age, all you have to do is to be best in to see what for your family, you have to do something to support your family, yet actually you're a very young girl, so you are denied your education, you can't go to school. Then we see emotional abuses. It's another form of violence whereby you are insulted verbally, you are threatened as a girl child because you're seen as inferior. They don't give you that chance that you want, especially in line with education. Yeah, this is being made, you are made to feel worthless. You are taken as a very inferior being. So that one is another form of violence whereby emotionally you are affected. You can't do, you have less visible, it's less visible, but it's really, it affects you even psychologically. Yeah, so a lot of this violence is caused by factors like, you see poverty in Uganda, it's really, it's at a very high rate. Then there are some harmful traditions and lack of awareness about girls' rights. Those are the major causes of these forms of violence in Uganda among the adolescent girls. Then we see the humanitarian violence against children and youth survey. They showed that while many children knew where to seek help for violence from, very few actually do. Just a few go to seek for help against the violence that they're facing. Only 5% of the girls and 17% of the boys. You see that the difference, 5% of girls, then 17% of the boys who experience the sexual violence, they seek for help. And there are few who receive such help when they go for. Yeah, then we also, the impacts of the violence on their adolescent girls. These girls are really affected, and many of them experience depression. You see there's low self-esteem because you look at yourself that, yeah, there's that stigma that's in your head. You can't even express yourself in public. So that one is a very big effect of violence on the girl child. Then we also see some girls, they drop out of school because of the violence or even early marriage, which affects their future opportunities because we see education is the key to success. So when a girl child drops out of school, there's no access to more education, and so your future is totally ruined. Yeah, then another effect is also the girls who experience sexual violence, they're really at a very high risk of early pregnancies. And this leads to unsafe abortions and even sexually transmitted infections like HIV. That is really rampant, apparently. It's at a very high rate. And most of the girl child, the young adolescent girls, are undergoing such. Yeah, then you see, when you're facing such problems, there are very many barriers that even you can't report, no access to the people. Actually, you have access, but there is that fear that you already have in your mind that you are an inferior person. You can't go ahead to express yourself, you know, that stigma. Yeah, you have even trauma in your head. So there are barriers that you can't even be able to report the violence. Unfortunately, many girls do not feel safe while reporting violence, even if they are going through. The girls, they really, hello?
Sorry, Jolly, I was just reflecting on that. Why do you think they feel unsafe? You had mentioned 5 to 6% of adolescent girls don't tell anybody, right? Or are the only ones that actually tell anybody. So it's a really high number of not reporting. And you mentioned fear and stigma, but what do you think are behind those fears?
Yeah, you as a girl, you be worried about being judged or even blamed if you speak out your mind. Yes. Then some girls don't trust that their families or even their schools or even authorities will take actions. You say it in fear. Actually, you keep it to yourself because you be worried that even if I say, no actions will be taken. So that is another, it's a very big barrier that the girl child is facing.
And Jolly, what do you think about the statistic that said the perpetrators are often classmates? So there was around 16% of perpetrators are actually classmates. What are some of the things that you as a peer educator, what would you suggest in terms of how we can do prevention in our schools to help reduce risks of gender-based violence?
Thank you very much. I see that when girls are educated, they are more aware of their rights and they can stand up for themselves. It's also very important to punish those who commit such violence against the girls, to ensure that the girls are protected. Because if you leave them unpunished, there's a way they develop more wings and they keep on practicing the same thing, which psychologically affects the girl child. You get?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Then also in the communities, like on the sides of the communities, we need to address the harmful norms and practices, like the early marriages and the gender-based violence, especially the parents. This one goes to the parents living alone, the peer in school or the peer outside school. The community, there's in some communities, the young girl child is forced to go into early marriage when the girl even you don't have something that you can sustain your life with. You are very young, you have not studied, so your future is totally blocked. You have nothing to do. So in some communities, they should also be educated about that. Then also maybe need more spaces for counseling services, and yes, for the girl child. So at least that fear is removed from their mind.
So in a way, demystifying some of these topics so that they might feel more comfortable talking about them either with peers or trusted, I think George was mentioning parasocial workers.
Come again?
We want to demystify, so to make these topics not something that's stigmatizing, but something that we can talk about in communities openly with trusted peers or parasocial workers.
Yes, thank you very much.
We had a colleague, Francesca, who was asking about, it was a two-part question, but I think I'm going to ask about the second one. What is your feelings around sexual education in schools? So Francesca was asking, is there any availability of age-appropriate education around these issues in Uganda?
Yes. We have been moving in schools, talking to girls, talking to the students generally, but then we also organize the session for the girls only, whereby we talk to them about their rights, what they're supposed to do, so that they have that self-esteem, that high self-esteem, so that they are really very comfortable when they are with the other gender. You know, the other gender, like the boys, they are so disturbing. So we have been moving in schools, talking about how the girls are supposed to conduct themselves and how they should overcome their fear that comes, especially the adolescents, the changes that comes in their bodies, the different changes, how they're supposed to handle, what they're supposed to do. That's what we have been doing.
Good. I've been trying to do the chat here, Jelly, and just generally in terms of you're a peer educator, and how is it, do you have a big group of peers whom you work with to help mitigate or reduce risks of GBV in the community?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about how it works in practice?
Oh, what we have been doing a lot in schools and in the community, how to mitigate. We have been raising awareness in different communities and different places, whereby we build the capacity of the people, especially the girl child, to overcome what they're going through. And the responses in the community, you know, not everyone will respond to what you're doing, but at least we tried our best as the group to make sure that most of them adapt to what we are teaching them with.
Good. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of community-based sort of peer educating and then school-based peer educating.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Julie. That was really helpful. And I think really kind of gave us an insight of how it looks practically on the ground. We're going to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes answering the questions from the chat. So I see that Miriam has written, "Thank you, Jolie, for sharing with us. I like the way that you are talking to fellow girls. Are there any activities that target boys and men to help them understand the need for them to prevent sexual abuse in your school and community?" So Jolie, Miriam is asking, do you specifically target men and boys, probably boys more specifically, in some of your peer education?
Yes, we do both, the girls and the boys. Because me as a peer educator in our group as we work, we don't only focus on the girls. Because there are other things that even boys need to know so that they all grow. As they're all growing, both the girls and the boys at adolescent age, because there are so many changes that they all experience. So we don't necessarily go only to the girls. Though we prioritize the girls, you know, they are seen as the inferior gender.
Do you,
Yes.
and there's another question, that are some really great ones here in the chat. Do you face any backlash from parents who are against sexual and reproductive health education? And if so, how do you engage them? And this is from Stella. Over to you, Jolie.
Yes. In Uganda, our parents, most of them, especially in the rural areas, most of them look at this peer education as spoiling their children. They don't see that side of exposure. They only see that side of, they don't see the positive exposure. They only see the negative exposure. Most of the Ugandan parents look at sexual education as, they look at it in a negative way. So most of them don't encourage their children to join that gathering, talking about, especially maybe if you're talking about the use of condoms, and yes, the use of condoms, especially to the boys. There's a way they see that their children are being exposed into, like we're making them to be aware of having sex. They don't see that we are trying to prevent the spread of STDs and HIV, those like HIV. So they don't look at that. And they also don't see the fact that we are trying to control early pregnancies, especially among the girls. So those are the challenges that we face.
Thank you. No, I think it's really important that you're bringing awareness to these issues. Thank you so much, Jolie. I'm going to shift back to George with a question. George, we were interested that about your interventions. A lot of them were organization-based, but I was wondering, what are some of the reflections on engaging adolescent girls to be part of the solution building in terms of changing these trends? I noticed on that slide, a lot of it was organizations, parasocial workers, and others coming in. So what are the recommendations about actually having adolescents like Jolie being the drivers in the process? Over to you, George, or to Chichi.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jessica. I think I'll let Chichi answer that question. Chichi, are you able to?
Sure. Thanks, George. Thanks, Jessica. Great question. And, one that we continue to grapple with as we continue to, do better and better when it comes to co-creation. But I will say that adolescent girls are a key part of this intervention and its continued improvement. Because first of all, the intervention is the adolescent girls are a key target, first of all, of the intervention. And it's around this intervention that we've built a qualitative study, which helps us hear from adolescent girls, what their experiences are, what it is that is working. It's an intervention that's meant to help promote disclosure, in addition to help ensure that those low percentages we saw of, girls who, first of all, might know where to go, but end up not getting the services that they need, not going, first of all. It's an intervention that removes all of those barriers. And so we've built a qualitative study around that so that the voices of adolescent girls can help us shape, what it is that works best to help them access these services. In addition, George, up on that slide was a key component of the intervention, which is parent dialogues. And one of the things that time wouldn't allow us to really talk about is the fact that, we have adolescent girls involved in those parent dialogues as well. So that, through the enactment of plays and so on and so forth, parents are able to hear from them how they see and experience sexual violence in their communities. And that's one of the things that parents have found particularly powerful. And it's one of the things that's helped us to ensure that parents become allies in protecting their children. So there's not left to organizations alone. And children are telling us, or girls are telling us, how this can be done. And girls are also saying thank you, for this particular intervention and telling us what it is about this intervention that they provide, that they're finding particularly satisfying. So in those ways, we're ensuring that adolescent girls are involved. And I'm sure that as time goes on, especially if this begins to be scaled up by the Ministry of Gender, that we can find more ways to ensure that girls are part and parcel of the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Chi-Chi. And just in the last few minutes, did you want to summarize some of the questions that we had in the chat? There seemed to be quite a bit of trends around some of the questions. So maybe Chi-Chi or George, some last reflections around the questions that I'm grateful that you were answering real time in the chat. And oh, there we go. Chi-Chi, if you can go a little bit closer to your mic, that would be appreciated.
Sure, if you can hear me, Jessica.
I can hear you.
Okay. What was your last statement?
It was if you could go closer to the mic. And if you could maybe summarize the questions from the chat. I think there were some trends in questions about methodology, asking about age. Just in the last 3 minutes that we have, maybe just a summary of the questions that you were real time answering, which I love, in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. If I may just answer some of the questions regarding methodology. I think there was that question about how we were able to get the assent from minors. Yeah, so as Violence Against Children and Youth Survey covers age 13 to 24. And so for those minors, those age 13 to 17, we are able to get their assent as well as the consent from their parent. However, what happens is that when you are getting the consent from the parent or a caregiver, we don't really mention that this study is about violence, but rather health and life experiences of young people. And so this particular process is approved by the ethical review bodies, both the local and the international IRB. I see also in some of the questions regarding the locations or the settlements. So what we did is basically to use the definition of, we are given a list by the UNHCR in terms of the settlements. And from these settlements, we were able to sample zones, not all zones, but we would just sample specific zones. And we had specific zone for female participants as well as specific zone for male participants. And this was done mainly to ensure that there is confidentiality, and also we reduce the chances or the risk of a perpetrator knowing that someone has been interviewed, so as to prevent more violence. So I think that's what I can say about the methodology. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, George. Chi-Chi, any last questions before we go to closing? Or questions or conclusions, I guess.
Well, just to say that, disability was a big part of what this survey captured. And we didn't have time to go into that, but I believe about a quarter of those surveyed happen to be living with disabilities, which we found quite surprising. And on the last question about consent, yes, we did obtain assent and consent, and there were some times where minors were classified as being emancipated because they were living on their own, assuming adult roles because they had no, parents or caregivers in their lives, and in that situation, they provide their own consent. Thanks.
Thanks, Chi-Chi. I know we had some other questions in the chat, but we are coming to the end of our hour. And here at the regional GBV working group for East and Southern Africa, we do like to keep time. I really appreciate George and Chi-Chi from Population Council for presenting the HVAC study. And more importantly, we really appreciate having Jolie on the line as well to really kind of humanize this issue for us. We hear a lot about facts and figures, but it's so important for us to understand the impact that has on the population that we're trying to serve. And I think here, Jolie, you were really eloquent about giving us information and maybe some of the things we can help to do to support you. So I really appreciate all of our speakers today. This is a quick reminder. I did put our video in the chat. I hope we're going to have another 100 or 200 views this afternoon, because I know that you are all copy and pasting our video. Please do watch our videos each day. As I mentioned, the regional GBV working group for East and Southern Africa will be having a video campaign. So every day we will release a new video that showcases an adolescent girl who is a human rights defender or advocate in their communities. And we've really come across some pretty amazing adolescent girls working in places like Mozambique and South Sudan, Rwanda, Ethiopia, DRC, Burundi, Eswatini, so many that we want to share with you and the world so that they get some recognition for this really amazing work. And as you saw from Jolie, it's not easy because there's a lot of backlash when we talk about these very sensitive issues. Sensitive not always is the right word, right? These very complex issues that have a lot of impact on women and girls, the safety and security of women and girls. So please look out for our videos every day. We are really looking forward to seeing you all back online this Friday at 11 a.m. East Africa time. We will be introducing an online safe space that is being rolled out in the DRC, and how you can access that in any country in the world, particularly here in East and Southern Africa, so that you'll have access to a lot of information that might be otherwise cut off for all of our adolescent girls here in East and Southern Africa. So thanks, everybody. Make sure that we are elevating and raising the voices of those who we serve here in East and Southern Africa, because today is the first day of the 16 days of activism, but really activism is every day of the year. which is why we tried to do here at the Regional GBV Working Group for East and Southern Africa. So thanks everybody for joining. I will see you all online on Friday at 11 a.m. East Africa time. And I know you'll be viewing our YouTube videos each and every day that we'd send them out. Thank you, George, Chichi, and Tajoli for joining us today. And to all of you, have a great afternoon. And let's make sure that we're really promoting these 16 days of activism. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.